The Sunday Independent is the most eye-catching front page, I think, because it's a picture of Padraig Harrington and Rory McIlroy, hands over each other there, a picture. The odd couple, they're all smiles, they're in their casual off-course gear. And it's when Rory met Paddy. There's a picture of the two, and it's when Rory met Paddy. Paul Kimmage has sat down, as you would have heard in that ad break just there, with the two of them for an in-depth chat, which we'll come to. The Sunday Times have Romelu Lukaku celebrating for Manchester United last night. The headline is "Make it a double, Huddersfield 0, Manchester United 2. The Mail on Sunday have Lukaku again as the picture. Video nasty is the headline. Lukaku nets twice, but VAR decision over Mata's disallowed strike sparks confusion is the headline. We've discussed that already on the show. The VAR line's not even particularly straight on the TV version of things anyway. The Observer Sports section, which I've misplaced, has a great picture as well from the Winter Olympics. It's Lizzie Yarnold, who is winning the gold in the skeleton, retaining the gold, in fact. Sun Sport then has a juicy Manchester United story. United stars savaged. Pogba and Jones miss cup victory after Jose blast. So this is Neil Ashton in the Sun. Jose Mourinho involved in what he says was an amazing dressing room bust-up with Paul Pogba and Phil Jones. Jose launched a furious attack after the Newcastle game. And then it seems Pogba trained during the week but pulled out of the Huddersfield game with a mystery illness. Now, Mourinho was asked about the mystery illness after the game. He said of it, "I don't know, and honestly I don't care. I was told by the doctor he was not coming."
It can't have been that amazing a bust-up considering how poorly the two of them were performing before that. There's nothing amazing about it.
Amazing bust-up is the reporting here. So, and Phil Jones pulled out of the game as well, it seems, at the weekend. So there's increased talk of maybe a Pogba exit. And then Star Sunday, what of arse, another video nasty. Sunday People have Lizzie Arnold and her gold medal. The Sunday World have as sick as a pog, Jose fuming as ill, Paul's absence stirs talk of exit, and the Sunday Mirror go with Lukaku again. Luke, no pog, but we still did the job. So they are your headlines. I mentioned the picture of the odd couple, as they're called here. It's certainly the longest piece, the most in-depth piece. I mean, certainly the golf nerd in me, when I knew this was coming, was delighted. Put the coffee on, sat back, cleared the decks, phone on airplane mode, and enjoyed this.
It's a great read. It's like with many of Paul's in-depth interviews, it almost seems that the work is simply just getting them together, and then that the rest of it, not to disparage anything about what Paul does, but it almost takes care of itself, because he manages to engineer a situation where he just manages to retrieve absolute gold, and particularly when he's got two subjects that are prepared to almost interview each other. It's a really, really great read.
Well, I suppose this is years in the making, because you have to have a relationship with Padraig Harrington, which goes on a very long time, and then it seems like over the last 2, 3, 4 years he's in a very patient way formed a relationship with McIlroy, and therefore, like, this doesn't happen. It struck me through
it's
PR.
true.
Like, if you went through his either agent to try and make this happen, or PR people, this just doesn't happen. This is, you have to go directly to the two themselves to make it happen.
Exactly. I remember meeting Paul. Actually, it was at the Irish Book Awards. He was at it, and I said, I had just done a book with Keiran Donaghy, and I was saying, "Are you going to get interviewing Keiran, before Christmas?" And he was saying, "No, I'm working on an even bigger one," which being Rory McIlroy. And I think I happened to be up here when he did a great interview with Rory. Was that last summer? He did a very extensive interview with him, but he also would have, Pádraig is someone who he's interviewed a lot through the years. They famously were here back in January, but also, because it was riveting. It was riveting. It was riveting to see Harrington, just the way they just bounced off each other again. And obviously he had seen the Shane Lowry dynamic with Harrington last year as well. So he thought, well, why not put the two of them together? But as Gavan says, so he I think Paul has used the expression before that he doesn't like to interview anybody under 30. He might have made an exception in Rory's case before, but the point is he wants somebody who has something to say. But he doesn't just do that. Like, the questions that he likes to use a prop. So right away, a nice little icebreaker and a little quirky has them, and they're the two kind of personalities that would be type of intrigued rather than flustered by signing the autograph, let's say. That was just gave a nice little insight. And I just thought then, just
for people who hadn't seen that, the logic was, it said, well, Harrington claims he knew this and so altered his autograph
pointedly admitted it. But effectively, the ruse is that Harrington believes that when you sign your autograph, the bigger your initials are, it means that the more egotistical you are. So Harrington, who is, most people would suspect to be the quite opposite of that, then deliberately hams up his initials so that it comes across that way. But it is, as Keiran says, Paul is fabulous for getting these icebreakers to really sort of bring people outside of the usual comfort zone that they might be conditioned into expecting when they do sit down with someone, and they might the journalists might think that they're going to get a rare insight, but in fact all they get are the same rehearsed banalities that have been rehearsed a million times over.
Sorry, you were mid-flow.
Yeah, well, he uses the props, but he asked some great questions.
Yeah.
Like, just in even, some of them, what's the hardest point about being Rory McIlroy, and the way that they then were able to take it both themselves or prodded along by the other guy. I mean, for Rory McIlroy to admit that his biggest fear is how long his parents will be around, and then Harrington to talk about when he lost his father. There were a lot of questions like that, along with their prep, and he touched on them. Some went into more detail, but he got asking about the Trump situation. Would you play that round again? Tiger, we're all intrigued about how Tiger's comeback. He got there. I had to, there were other parts of it, like about, like a great question. Where's the claret jug in your house? Again, because it tells you something. Yeah. And it's true, like when you go to different, I've been looking obviously in the job.
Just banging on that table there.
To interview various people, and it is very interesting about, let's say, how prominent their cabinet is. There are some people you wouldn't know that they had done anything. There's one or two where the place is a shrine to themselves, It's I thought that was, again, he just asked really good questions, and what you got was gold, and it was we're putting the phone into airplane mode.
Well, let's go through some of the gold then, because there's so much here. People you really have to read this piece. We won't be able to even scratch the surface of it. Like, there's lots of interesting things. Their dynamic is the interesting thing. Like, the odd couple is the reason I was more intrigued about this by far than the Shane Lowry Harrington thing, because I figured they were fairly pally and it was a fairly straightforward relationship, whereas the Rory McIlroy Harrington relationship has never been overly straightforward or pally. Like Kimmage says, it's now 11 years since McIlroy won the silver medal the same year Harrington won at Carnoustie, and so Rory had gone to his house, it seems, shortly after that. They'd spent some time together, but really a very little time together anyway. I mean, they inhabit the same world, but really they're not in each other's lives, is the general point. And it seems that he asked Harrington would it be up for it, and Harrington said, I'd like to do it, but I'm not going to be your problem. As in, Rory's not going to want to do it. And he asked Rory said, I'm open to that, but our minds work very differently. And Kimmage says the second surprise was how jumpy Pádraig was once the venue had been set, which was at the lodge at Pebble Beach. It's on, he's doing it. Are you sure? It won't be as good as the one we did with Shane, says Harrington. What are you going to ask? Very un-Harrington-like, seems slightly jumpy about it. Maybe that's a symptom of the feeling there's a distance in the relationship.
And actually, what's amazing, and sorry to interrupt you mid-flow, but what I often find amazing about Paul's piece is that he has 3 broadsheet pages minus the large photograph, where you can go into all manner of things and you can ask them what they think about X or Y, and there's some great exchanges where they're asked to psychoanalyze each other. One of the things that I think is fascinating is that even with 3 pages, you only get to scratch the surface a little bit of exactly what Harrington was motivated by when he started saying, what are you going to ask? Why did he suddenly become so jumpy? That I would have loved to have been able to give Paul another 400 words to try and go back into the annals of why is a man who is easily the more calm of the two, or the more approachable.
It did strike me, by the way, he said in here he had never read the piece him and Shane had done, but he seemed to be of the opinion that he knew this wouldn't be as good as the piece with him and Shane. Now, that doesn't necessarily mean he read it, but I wonder if he had actually snuck a look. So, I mean, there's an element with this piece of the two of them discovering things about each other, which is quite nice for us to, in real time, sit in and observe happening. Even small things. But this struck me about Rory as well, because I look at Rory and I don't know, I wonder how engaged he is with golf a lot of the time, because he's a well-rounded individual, and I feel like he's not obsessed with the game in the way that Harrington is. And so there's this lovely moment where they're trying to think back to the last time they would have played together, and they remember it's Photo Island in 2014, and then Harrington wonders, maybe was it Memphis one year, and McIlroy says the last time I played in Memphis was 2012, and Harrington, incredulous, it says, do you seriously remember the last time you played Memphis? Rory, yeah. And Harrington goes, and you remember that Photo Island was 2014? And then here's the line that got me. Rory says, I would know every winner of every tournament of every year and where the golf course was. Harrington says, I couldn't even tell you the years of the tournaments I've won. I know some of them, but I certainly couldn't tell you the tournaments I've played. McIlroy turns to him and says, what year did you get beaten in the final at Wentworth by Ian Woosnam? Harrington, no idea. McIlroy, I watched it, I was there, 2001. Harrington, was it? I'd have said 99 or something. I can't believe that. I can't believe that about McIlroy either. I would have thought he'd be the type of guy who would not know who had won 5 weeks ago.
I don't know if I would have thought that, because you'd think as someone who had grown up so immersed in the game and who had been so clearly destined for bigger things that he would have been obsessive about it. Actually, what it struck me was, I remember one of the Leinster players remarking in the 2 years that Jonathan Sexton wasn't there, that they actually missed his encyclopedic brain around the place, that there were times where they'd be in a huddle on the pitch deciding, okay, what play are we going to do here? Were we going to try something rehearsed? And they decided that they would try this particular skip pass and a return and an offload. And Sexton goes, oh yeah, just like we did against the Scarlets in the Pro 12 back in 2009.
Yeah.
And everyone went, you seriously remember this sort of thing?
Yeah.
But it's the brain of someone who eats, breathes, sleeps, drinks, everything.
I suppose I just feel McIlroy is such a natural talent.
But,
like he's just a sublime natural talent. And I know there's no such thing. I know there's no such thing as talent, but he's just gifted and in a state of flow. Whereas I feel like Sexton is a more manufactured, driven type.
But that's because we've known Rory since he was 8 or 9, or seen footage. He's been on, was it the Jerry Kelly show, chipping balls into. But that's because the guy had practice more chipping like that than any other 8 or 9 year old or even 12-year-old, you know.
Yes.
And what ignited him would have been, like he's spoken about it, you know, let's say watching the Masters 97.
Yeah, and look, I'm sure his own game ignites him, and I'm sure his own talent ignites him and his own career. I was less sure he cared if Brandt Snedeker won in Memphis 4 years ago. No, because like Harrington doesn't care and he's as obsessed as anyone.
Well, and I suppose that we've just kind of piddled all over your thesis there, but there is something in it that's true as well, which is where they talk very early in the piece about the way in which they now prepare for tournaments and their general approach and whether they have a camp. And McIlroy, and I'm not sure if I've ever seen him talk about this kind of detail before, but he talks about how he doesn't ever stay on the course, or if it's a hotel resort thing, he never stays there. He'll rent a house, he'll bring his own chef, and he'll have this small, he doesn't like calling them an entourage, but they are an entourage, but he has this same 6 to 8 people and his wife around him, and then after the course he goes home and he doesn't engage with anyone else. So I suppose to a point he's not really living, breathing, sleeping, eating the game, because yes, he wants to control everything he possibly can, but it doesn't seem like there's much evidence that once he gets home after he does his early practice round that he's thinking all that much about his own game, that there's a certain amount of wanting to close himself off for the world, and that golf is the last thing in his mind.
Erica is important. Like they had dinner with the Snedekers because his wife Erica is very friendly with Brandt Snedeker's wife, so it seems like that's a big part of how he prepares now. It's almost around her to a point, and he's very happy to do it, because you detect a slight sadness on Harrington's part that Rory isn't really part of the Irish crew.
Yes.
You know, like we don't really see you. You're a little bit closed off from us is a sentiment that's in there.
But like Rory has learned through the years about what's effective and what isn't effective preparation. You know, like obviously, you know, he's talked a lot about what happened in the Masters in 2011 and about how his prep was, particularly how he handled day 3, that if you keep overly thinking about it, you'll fry your brain and you'll be drained for when it counts. So he has a system that works for him, but he's I thought, again, another feature that I thought was just brilliant with the interview was the way that it was quite personal in parts about, again, when he was speaking about you know, when I thought the bit when he was talking about his parents and talking about Jerry, you know, about his father and about where he had come from, and about like. And
for people who haven't read that, obviously, because that'll be a lot of people, what struck you, or what are you talking about?
Well, just that, like he was saying that if you could choose Jerry, which would he prefer, pre-50 or over 50? And he was saying, well, you know, the Jerry post-50. And then but Pádraig Harrington said, well, I'd say he would say that he would miss the hardship that he had, or the struggles like pulling the pints that he enjoyed, I suppose, what life was like pre going on tour with him. But I think another line that I had to laugh with, like, we've got to remember, as you said, although there was a bit of a distance, Pádraig Harrington was invited to Rory McIlroy's wedding.
Yeah.
And what I had to laugh at was when he talked about how it was a low-key, lovely wedding. Stevie Wonder was the band.
No, I know.
That didn't make the piece, but I remember thinking...
There's a bit of that, but Rory says it wasn't over the top, which you've now...
But they
pierced that slightly with your Stevie Wonder point.
Well, I seem to recall a lot of the coverage, or even the sense of occasion there was.
But I don't know if that's fair, because if you remember, there were some fairly ridiculous columns at the time saying, well, why aren't we allowed to take photos?
Oh, that's true, yes.
Like, if you remember, okay, it's a huge event, and if you're a multimillionaire like Rory McIlroy, then actually... proportionally, whatever he paid Stevie Wonder is probably the same as the 2 or 3 grand most of us will pay for the local band at our wedding. But it was as private as one of those things could be when you think about it. Like I didn't see a single photo, and it's fairly clear that Harrington and others have been asked not to talk about it because Kimmage goes digging a little bit. So Roy says it wasn't over the top. Harrington, so this is the lovely thing when they get talking to each other, and Harrington almost says it surprised me that it wasn't a bit more over the top. Harrington says, no, it was a romantic family wedding. Very surprising. It wasn't ... Kimmage says, an event. Harrington, yeah, an event. It was just a lovely family gathering. I had a great time with Eric as aunts and uncles. I was in my element. Kimmage says, okay, I have one question. And Harrington then says, no, I'm not going to talk about it anymore. Harrington's not in the habit of saying I'm not going to talk about stuff. So I would say they were asked not to say much.
Or maybe there's a sense that he doesn't want to talk about someone else's occasion when the person who ran the occasion is right beside him.
Probably a bit of that.
Story to tell.
And Kimmage says, you have to answer this. Kimmage says, you have to answer this. Harrington says, no, not about the wedding. And then McIlroy almost gives the green light and says, okay, go on then. And Kimmage asks, what is a 3-time major winner buy a 4-time major winner for a wedding present? Harrington, there were no gifts. And McIlroy says, we said our gifts was people spending time with us over the weekend. But again, that was a nice insight into...
Yeah, really lovely exchange. And just to hark back, I sense that we're kind of arcing away from this, but just because I did want to point it out that you talked about how Harrington appears to have almost a regret that Rory isn't part of the club and doesn't go for the organised dinners of all the Irish players on tour, the same as he did under Des Smith when he first broke on. There's a remark just made in passing that they're talking about the return of Tiger and whether Tiger will be a force, and for anyone listening, by the way, they do both think that Tiger is certainly has top 5 finishes in Augusta in his future, that they think that he can create a game.
Yeah.
So we'll see. But they remark about how Tiger has talked about missing the camaraderie of the tour, and that's part of what he misses in the routine that he needs to get back to, is being able to bump into other players in the locker room. And there's a remark, I can't remember which of the two of them, I think it's Harrington, who says that was never Tiger's way anyway. So they're almost wondering whether Tiger's comeback narrative and some of the routine that he's looking for is contrived to some extent, which I thought was very interesting.
Yeah, not to cross the line then of giving too much away, because I again, the thing to do is just read this because there's so much here. But your point, Keiran, about the parents is definitely for me the most affecting part of it. It's where you get a real glimpse at, regardless of fame or money or lifestyle, you are still governed by the laws of mortality and the worries that we all have about just how quickly time's going by. And so they're talking about. I think this was the best kind of the part of the questioning as well that would have done it for me. Where, what's the hardest thing about being Rory McIlroy at this moment in time? Is a great question. Like, everyone wants to know the answer there, and he talks about living an unusual life and having to relate to normal people being difficult. And Harrington's worries are about being away from his family, and will he look back and think, I should have spent these very valuable years with my family. I might worry about that. And Kimmage picks up on the worry aspect and says, worry is an interesting word. What do you worry about most? And again, that's a question that we're all going to want to hear the answer to. And it's McIlroy's honesty which takes Harrington aback, that kind of grabs you, because McIlroy says, honestly, probably how long my parents are going to be around. And Harrington's reaction is, wow, I couldn't bring that up. McIlroy says, yeah, it is. And then Harrington says, my mother wouldn't want it mentioned, but yeah, that would be my biggest worry. That's a real moment between the two of them. Beautifully captured as well.
Yeah.
On Trump, if we finish on that, because that comes up.
Yeah. I mean, Paul has been quite sympathetic towards Rory on that, and I don't think there was anything malicious on Rory. But I would have written a column at the time that it was slightly naive, because what a sports person working in America now is different to what it would have been even 2 or 3 years ago.
Like
the environment,
post-Kaepernick.
like even you have the controversy at the moment around the NBA All-Star game, where LeBron James was responding to, had done an uninterrupted blog with Kevin Durant, and they spoke about Trump and how he's unfit for office essentially, and a Fox anchor who is relatively well known, I think, as following of 2 million on
She
Twitter
does,
or
yeah, I
whatever.
checked
But
today.
I forget her name. But she basically said, "Shut up and dribble." And LeBron came out yesterday and says, "Well, I'm not going to shut up and just dribble." And I think where Pádraig was coming from and Shane Lowry were coming from in that interview was that they're just going to hit a golf ball, even if it's with Trump, and that's it. And they were happy to shut up politically, but because Trump would have said when he got the role about, I'm only going to play. He said first of all he wasn't going to play any golf. That Obama played too much golf. Then he said I'm only going to play golf with people who will help us. And at that time, playing with a prominent sports person like a Rory McIlroy, whether Rory realised it or not, was more than just a game of golf. And you have
it was so early on, it was one of the first rounds. So suddenly, if you think actually this is going to be a much more prominent thing in Trump's life, but it turns out he plays golf every second or third day, then it loses a little bit of its sense of momentum.
Well, he says here, by the way, would you do it again? Rory says, well, from a self-preservation point of view, probably not, but I've no problem saying I had a great time. I really enjoyed it. That'd disappoint me a bit as well, to be honest. I mean, I still really like Rory McIlroy in a host of ways, but even see, Rory makes the point, and it's fair enough, and Harrington made the point last year and reiterates the point as well, that sports stars have a big soapbox and they may not be qualified to make informed political statements or opinions. But I mean, Trump is a special case. He really is. And even if you just check his Twitter feed this morning, so I'm talking minimal research. You don't have to, because I mean, all of us could be more informed about everything, absolutely, myself included. But even Trump just this morning, appreciate it's after this event, but it's not the first time he's behaved appallingly. What he has done here, he's leveraged the deaths of 17 children in Florida with his tweet. He says, very sad that the FBI missed all of the many signals sent out by the Florida school shooter. This is not acceptable. They're spending too much time trying to prove Russian collusion with the Trump campaign. There is no collusion. Get back to the basics and make us all proud. You think how appalling that is? Yeah. There are 17 bereaved families, kids. The gun control laws are a complete mess. Yeah,
and he's using this still finding a way to leverage Russia into it.
To bring Russia and collusion and attack the FBI. And I mean, it's beyond question that he's unpresidential.
And there is a great piece in it about the art of being Pádraig Harrington, where Paul calls him back up on an interview that he gave on the Late Late only last month. He was talking about whether he would do it again if the government asked you. This is a quote from the Late Late. Presumably Tubridy says, if Trump paid a state visit to Ireland and the government asked you to play a round of golf with him, would you play a round of golf with Donald Trump? And Pádraig goes, let's see if I can get this right. What's the difference between a smart man and a wise man? And somebody doesn't know. Harrington says, a smart man knows the answers to all of the questions, a wise man avoids the questions. To which Tubridy just asks the question again. He says, I can guarantee you, if the government asked me to do something, I would do it. Which is not an answer at all.
Kimmage even says in the piece, you fudged it. I do have some sympathy. I think there is a slight difference. One of them in the piece makes the point. There is a difference between a personal request, will you come and play with me this Saturday, and an official
it's not a diplomatic
through
incident.
The state but there, and I mean you still have the right to refuse, and there's an argument you should refuse, but I do think there is a difference between if it comes through an official channel. The office of president has requested through the Irish state that this happens,
and then do you do it all the more?
I don't know. I think you're more likely to do it in that case.
I think
because you're respecting the office.
You're always going to be damned if you do and damned if you don't.
Well, that's true. I mean, there is certainly a very strong argument that Trump has completely disrespected the office. But I think there is a slight difference when it comes as a personal, hey, do you want to play at the weekend? I think you should absolutely say no in that instance, because he's a fairly appalling human being.
But it's all the more...
The office of president, you could argue you're respecting the office if not the man.
The office of president has, let's say, invited various teams, players to the White House, and they've declined.
And I'm with those guys completely.
And they've had to weigh up about how you may not obviously there have been, let's say, other Republican presidents before, but you respect the offices.
Well, Greg Norman famously turned down Bill Clinton, and then realised I should go and play with him.
That is part of the grey area here, is that as much as the sports person work in America now, and that's what the two boys are, whether they were aware of it, but golf is works by a different rule. Their tendency would be more Republican. Dave Hannigan's written about this extensively, so it's funny. That's where albeit I know that Norman.
Well, I don't know if it's right or not, but it was Rex Huggard of the Golf Channel seemed to have done a fairly widespread survey on the basis of anonymity of the PGA Tour players, and the only Hillary Clinton voter he found was Phil Mickelson of all of them. like across the board.
Funny that.
Yeah,
I wondered though if I mean, Donald Trump wears so many hats, and not just literal "Make America Great Again" hats. But if Rory was asked to play on the basis that he's not the president, he's taking a day off, he's just Donald John Trump, but he also happens to be a guy who owns a series of golf resorts around the world, and he's a guy who's invested in your sport, then do you take up the invitation?
Well,
so it's very difficult.
I mean, I'll put it to you this way.
One of the worst things Rory said afterwards was, I was curious to see the Secret Service and the machinery that goes on around the president. You know?
Yeah.
I
That's not really a reason.
No, that was poor enough, you know, that showed you don't hammer a guy, but I mean, really, I mean, you're not curious about seeing a few SSS or a few Secret Service slip of the tongue, a few Secret Service guys that you would very publicly play this round with him. But that was one of the things he said afterwards.
Yeah, it's a bit of a misnomer, or a bit of a fallacy to bring that one back in response, given that Rory McIlroy is hardly any secret to a security detail of his own from time to time.
But again, it just goes back that the environment has changed, I think, and you know, the important, the sports people do have a platform.
Yeah.
And the key is, and it was interesting to hear Kobe Bryant speak about it, you know, that he would have been of a generation post Jordan where they wouldn't have really, that tradition of the black athlete of the 60s wouldn't have been really, in early 70s, like Arthur Ashe, wouldn't have been carried through in the 80s by Jordan or even Kobe throughout the 90s, but how it had changed. But he just said, just be informed. But you do have the likes, and you do have, like, you have someone like Greg Popovich working in the San Antonio coach who's operating in Texas, which is obviously a red state. But even some of the comments that and the pushback that he's giving, by example, I think, like, again, I think the sports people are well aware of their platform. LeBron James has spoken again at the weekend about how he has a voice for people who don't have a voice. And again, I just think those comments that Rory and Pádraig would have said would have been fine in 2015, 2016, but it's changed.
And do you not think that all sports people, because I would to a point, don't they have the right to, I don't want to use the word ignorant, but to say, well, look, I'm not an expert in this. My life revolves around being the best I can be at this very specific skill set, which is in this case hitting a ball around a golf course. I'm really not the guy you should all be looking to for guidance here.
Well, absolutely. So, and Rory McIlroy doesn't have to be political, but whether he likes it or not. And again, I can empathise with him, but that was inadvertently a political act. When you go Trump, no one's saying you have to come out and condemn. But what you do an act that helps give them a certain legitimacy, which is what happened. I mean, if it's posted on Twitter, it's out there, it's a bit of, you know what, he's not a bad guy behind it all. Subliminally, it sends out the wrong message. So, but look, that's just one element of the interview.
It's actually not a big element of the interview.
And you know, he has spoken about his views on it, and no, it's an intriguing read. And again, we've only touched on it actually, even though we made 4 or 5 points.
Yeah, it's well worth reading. It's really, really good. So you've got 7 majors between the two of them, and it's a real insight into their relationship. I think people had wondered from afar, were they close, were they not close, what was the nature of the relationship. So
and even
it's all there
to a certain point, I think even Paul is surprised at how close they appear to being, that they've shared so many social occasions when there is this perception that they don't really inhabit each other's lives at all. So
and look, you've got to remember, they've been in that room, you know, Team Europe. They've been, you know, they play for Ireland. Like they have been collaborated before. And again, they were at each other's wedding, or at Rory's wedding. Pádraig was at it. But no, and that it was a great interview. Yeah,
it's really, really good. So check that out in Sunday Independent. There's loads more to get to. We'll do that next.
Off the Ball on News Talk,
in association with the Air Sport app, allowing you to cast your favourite sporting action from your tablet or mobile phone straight to your TV.
At Bruce Betting, we're celebrating 40 years as one of Ireland's leading bookmakers with the launch of our brand new website and iOS app. Packed with features and easy to use, the new Bruce Betting app includes ACCA insurance, cash out and live casino. Bruce Betting, giving you more. In store, online and now on your phone. Please gamble responsibly.
It all comes down to this. All those months out there, in the good weather and the bad. This is what we've been training for. You hear them cheering? That's for you. This isn't a training ground anymore. This is the real thing. Are you ready? Let's go. We're ready for winter racing. Are you? Plan your day at the races at goracing.ie, because nothing else feels like this.
Hello, I'm Trina Horrigan, and I suffered from heel spurs and plantar fasciitis for years. Even after surgery, my feet were too sore to walk any distance. I went to Foot Solutions and they fitted me with customised arch supports and a great pair of runners. The results are unbelievable. Now I walk to work and can stay on my feet all day. The visit to Foot Solutions has made a huge difference to my life. I can't recommend them highly enough.
Visit Foot Solutions in Dublin, Cork, Waterford, Limerick, Galway and Newbridge, or visit footsolutions.ie.
Little Emily, before you, I never knew what the world looked like at 4 a.m. I never knew nappies had a wrong way round. I never knew I'd feel worry deep in the pit of my stomach when I heard you cough. So I'm glad I found out about undertheweather.ie. It's always open and gives great advice from GPs and pharmacists on how to treat everyday illnesses yourself at home. But you knew that already, didn't you, Emily? Undertheweather.ie from the HSE.
It's time to trade up to the new Peugeot van you've been thinking about. Because right now, every new Peugeot van, from the award-winning Expert to the Partner and the Boxer, comes with Peugeot Advantage. Take our flexible payment options, add up to €4,000 scrappage allowance, and it all adds up to a great deal for your business. Find out more about Peugeot Advantage at your local dealer. See Peugeot.ie for details. Terms and conditions apply. Off the ball.
In association with Air. Don't miss live and exclusive Premier League action this month on the Air Sport Pack.
This is News Talk.
Welcome back. Gavan, Reilly, political correspondent with TV3, and Keiran, Shannon of the Irish Examiner are here in studio. So we won't spend forever on this, but because it was touched on last week, certainly the rugby media relationship was touched upon. But several of the Sunday writers are talking about the ongoing decline in relations between media and multiple teams. Jim Gavan, Joe Schmidt. The boxing situation is also mentioned by Eamon Sweeney. So Eamon Sweeney in the Sunday in a Minute back page is talking about it. Shane McGrath, page 74 of the Mail, is talking about the fact this is a control thing. Above all else, it's about managers wanting to exert control. Dennis Walsh, I thought, had a very good piece in the Sunday Times on page 13. Dennis Walsh is largely focused on the Dublin Jim Gavan versus RTE situation.
Yeah, I mean, there was some... Micheál Clifford would have gone there with the Mail, which I thought it was interesting, where I hadn't seen the line as such, but he said that when Bernard Brogan was unable to participate in the Donegal game last Saturday week, he has a niggle, replied Gavan. You know, he had more, and he just talks about how it would only be exposed for not only being shy of the truth, but barely masked his indifference, contempt, disregard for the press. I just thought that was an interesting line.
I realised you said that, yeah.
I suppose of the pieces, Eamon Sweeney has a strong enough piece, Shane McGrath too. I particularly like Dennis Walsh's. Like, there was a good bit of journalism in it. You know, he obviously made certain calls, so he would have explained. Over the years, inter-county managers have often lent on the generosity of their Sunday games contacts, and their request for match footage would have been quietly met. For the last 3 championships, however, the Sunday game production team have taken an enlightened approach. Every match they cover is uploaded to a Google Drive, which is made available to any inter-county team who approach them for footage. There is no preferential treatment, and they don't ask for anything in return. What they hope, however, is that their generosity would be reciprocated and some extra interview access would be granted along the way. So
I hadn't realised that.
Yeah. So they put it up on Google Drive, and so if no matter who you are, you can go in and you get access. Because you see, people like misinterpreting maybe earlier in the week, it's more than just getting your opponent, your own footage. It's footage of opponents, and also it could be opponents that are coming well down the line. I mean, Eamon Fitzmaurice famously would have noted that they would have seen that when they went to cover was a Cork Clare and Munster semi-final in 2013, that Dublin were at it, you know, at a game like so, and it turned out Dublin ended up playing Cork in the All-Ireland quarter-final, so it's nearly they have eyes everywhere. So now what I have been led to believe that Dublin would have possibly had, through a couple of other contacts there, they would have had people going into RT and getting access that other people wouldn't have had access at a certain point. Like, a big thing for tactically is to get camera angles for the high behind. So, like, I mean, that way you can spot different manoeuvres, kickouts. You
can see all 30 players.
But that's something that RT wouldn't have had, though.
Pardon?
That's something that RT wouldn't have had in
Not
this
in the
instance.
National League,
Yeah.
but I mean, you're talking about through the years. No, but people would say they were asking for stuff that other people wouldn't have asked for. But they've been RT have tried to put in a system here where it's more equitable.
Yeah.
So, like, just from reading it.
So is your interpretation then that, and you see, this is the thing, because we'll touch on Joe Schmidt in a second. We don't know why exactly Joe Schmidt has cancelled the Monday briefings for the print journalists. We don't know why Jim Gavan is not talking to RTE. Like, we haven't heard it from Gavan himself, so we're operating in a vacuum here.
Although there is, again, sorry to interrupt, but there is one line in Dennis Walsh where he does attribute that the RTE reporter who sought to speak to Jim Gavan was told cooperation is a two-way street, which does suggest that there is truth to the DVD complaint.
It does, but cooperation is a two-way street, could be anything. I mean, it certainly seems like the DVD issue is at the root cause, but Jim Gavan hasn't exactly explained why.
It's a combination of things.
You see, that's why I wonder, like, if Diarmuid Connolly hadn't blown up last year, would this be such a big deal now? Is that part of the thinking here? But so, sorry, that's interesting. Your understanding, Keiran, is that Dublin, up until now, had been getting a few extra angles and a few extra types of footage that other counties hadn't been, and maybe now RTE have pulled back on that to make it more equitable across the board, and Dublin presumably aren't best pleased with that? It's not just they're not just looking for a DVD.
It's not it in isolation, but it would be another reason where there's been a bit of a pushback. You know, it could be things like even like, if you take it, they won the 3 in a row last year. Like, they didn't win Team of the Year, let's say. Even those little things add a little bit to the tension. But I think where, as I said, Dennis you could see he made the calls. I think he touched on it at the end, you know, with the strongest editorial line on it, which is, will Dublin sponsors be bothered about the current standoff with RT? Probably not yet anyway. But for Dublin to pick a fight on an issue such as this shows poor judgment on their part. They need to get over themselves. Like, a big value of the Dublin setup, and I believe it is one that in generally they've lived by, is humility. Jim Gavan often speaks about it. You often hear them talk about it. This showed this wasn't an act of humility, and it may go against. They've had a media manager. Takes the role very seriously and overall has been quite successful. I mean, they would have felt in previous years hype has hurt Dublin. Dublin would have been disliked. Overall, these players individually have come across as quite likeable.
Yeah, they're great. Yeah.
And I mean, as much as the cliche is to say, oh, they just speak in cliches, I mean, you've had a few of them in
They
here
don't.
through
Yeah,
the
it's
years,
not true. They
like
don't.
the Keane O'Sullivans. I've sat down with quite a few of them, Kevin McMenamin, and they're actually at various times in the year they can be very open.
Yeah.
Philly McMahon's just wrote an inspiring book.
Yeah, Paul Flynn's another.
Yeah, so like you've got to give that has to be acknowledged. So I do think that they often live by humility, but this is a time where I think they've gone. I think this counters, and the other thing, it adds a distraction when they're actually in the game of making sure the media isn't a distraction.
It does make them a story when they wouldn't otherwise be.
Yeah, I think they
but I
maybe
wonder,
haven't thought that through.
Because it has struck me as strange, because initially the point was made that, well, RTE don't have access to the footage because they're not the rights holders for the league.
In fairness, I was actually
TG
I was one of the people that was pointing that out, and I did notice get quoted earlier on. And what's helpful actually today is that Dennis Walsh has figured out exactly what game Jim Gavan was purportedly looking for, which is Galway's league game against Tyrone on the very first weekend of the league. That wasn't broadcast live, so RTE had it included in their Sunday night highlights show, but it wasn't carried live by either Ayr or TG Cahir, which does beg the question as to where the footage came from. And did in fact RTE send a camera along purely for highlights purposes? So in fact, maybe all along that RTE may have been the only people who have the full footage that he's been looking for, which in fairness is one point to make.
Yeah, it does all seem, I mean, the headline Dublin sulk over video games, certainly Dennis Walsh doesn't think much of it, and actually he uses two interesting examples. I guess it raises the wider issue of how the media and various teams are going to interact over the coming years, because they're not politicians. We don't owe them. They're not obligated to come out and speak. So
they're not professionals.
No, well, particularly in the GAA case, there's an element of goodwill. Like Joe Schmidt is paid by the IRFU and they have commercial reality, so he has to do the press conference and he has to do broadcast media. But beyond that, he can probably begin to draw a line. But so Dennis mentions some interesting examples. I wasn't aware of this one, where a few years ago Glasgow banned a BBC Scotland reporter from Ibrox
Rangers,
banned a BBC Scotland reporter from Ibrox because they weren't happy with his reporting of their financial problems. And BBC Scotland, in retaliation, imposed a boycott on covering Rangers' home games and press conferences. And BBC Scotland took the view that the integrity of their journalism must be defended above all else. And Dennis also pointed something I hadn't realised. He says, eagle eyes in the IRFU will have noticed repeated references to Lansdowne Road in some daily papers this week, as opposed to the sponsor's name by which the stadium is now known. Hadn't realised that was happening. Eamon Sweeney touches on that whole area as well.
He does, and his general point appears to be that he appears to take the opposite position to Keiran beside me, because he says that basically that, in short, screw it, that the media can do easily without getting more anodyne, banal quotes from Jim Gavan after a game. That what are we going to miss?
David Meath has weighed in with exactly that point, and it's Eamon Sweeney's overarching point as well. David Meath says, the question you should be asking Media Access is, do the sports supporting public actually care? The issue is always viewed through the prism of the media's self-interest. Personally, I've no interest in press conferences and manager interviews. What do we learn from them ever anyway? And that is a fair point. Like Eamon Sweeney makes the point that where you really learn stuff is like the Kimmage with McIlroy and Harrington situation, where it's long form and there's probing questions. Jerry Thornley sat down with Joe Schmidt on the first week of the Six Nations and did a big full-on one-on-one interview, which is worth about 38 million press conferences with Joe Schmidt. But Sweeney makes the point that these things aren't particularly good. The post-match interview is never particularly good. And I would say actually, and I wonder, you know, the Joe Schmidt is now not talking to the print dailies on a Monday for that briefing. I have to be honest, I would much rather read in that space, that real estate which is designated on a Monday paper
the Schmidt quote
to
piece.
rugby. I'd much rather read a really good piece of analysis.
Yeah, no, that's true.
Which tells me something about the game rather than Schmidt. So actually, I think it's self-defeating. I think Schmidt, in this instance, could control the narrative for a week or certainly for a day or so. Instead, there will now be a requirement for a piece of analysis or a column from a former player who may point out the failings of Schmidt. But anyway, sorry. That's
on the Mondays. But I do think it is quite interesting afterwards. I still think it's. I mean, a journalist like Eamon now, let's say, wouldn't be. Like, there's a certain freedom as a particular columnist where you're not having to encounter. I often think of the local media guys in particular, by having to go and meet the guy after a game, is compromised in. It's time for someone else to move on, for someone else to get the gig. There's that. So I think it's useful to have. Eamon doesn't need to do it, but it's useful because, you know, you'll get a column from something a manager did say. One thing that I think is a waste of time is trying to get a word with the managers, you know, the 20 minutes beforehand. They're in a different space. You'll be the journalist.
Except Davy Fitzgerald. They're always commenting.
That's true.
Well, it's funny you mentioned Davy, and just to go back to the point about whether there's any value in post matches at all. In a previous life for a summer, I worked in the communications unit of the GAA, and I was there on match days, and I got to witness some of the sit downs that the print reporters would do after the manager had done their broadcast obligations, and I'm suddenly aware of the word obligations, which perhaps might not be the fairest word at all. Some of the ones that I witnessed David Fitzgerald do at the time post-match were extraordinarily revealing. That he was still managing Waterford at the time. There was a semi-final where he was absolutely convinced that they had just finally gotten hold of Kilkenny until they didn't, and Kilkenny beat them at the death. And the gut-wrenching heartbreak, the defeat etched on his face, was remarkable, and there was absolutely a value to doing that. There was a value to Brian Cody being asked by Marty Morrissey after the 2009 final, how do you feel? And Cody going off on one because he doesn't feel he's getting the appropriate plaudits that his feat has just deserved. So there is a value too. There's a value in Tony O'Donoghue talking to Martin O'Neill after the playoff and suddenly getting his head eaten off for asking legitimate questions about team selection, which had a very diplomatic response that Martin O'Neill chose not to use. So there is a value to it, but only in instances where the person speaking has any interest in saying something, which Jim Gavan clearly doesn't.
But I still find it. I find it quite telling, even what Gavan is saying. Like, he won't give you.
If you keep banging that table, I'm going to bang you.
I find it interesting when Gavan, even the way that he's not going to offer an anecdote about, let's say, the way Liam Griffin would talk about, or Lucknan would talk about what Davy Fitz did, and then he gets a goal in the last minute. He was practicing those frees. He's not going to offer colour as such. But even the way he talks, like, about let's say, I thought even, let's say, when the one game they lost, let's say the league final last year, the way that he spoke, like he was saying that he was still happy with how the players had showed resilience. They'd come from, was a 5 down to level it. Like there are little insights that he's actually giving that, like, you could tell that even, I thought, let's say after the Kildare game where he spoke, he basically was saying, we scored 2-10 all from play and we've only been back 2 weeks. Like, the message he's trying to get out there is, we're going for this, or that we're fairly formidable, like, and that we've yet to really only crank up. He's not overly saying it, but there's subtext there, and it'll be interesting. Does he speak to RT? I think, are they in Castlebar next weekend? RT will be covering highlights. I don't know, it'll be Ger Canning, or if Marty's still on the dancing or whatever, but whoever's there. It'll be interesting what happens.
Yeah, you'd wonder how long he can maintain the silence, given the fact that, as Dennis Walsh points out, RTE are going out of their way on Google Drive to actually put up all the games and facilitate these teams as much as possible. Like, that seems fairly fair.
But
to me.
That's championship again.
Sure, but will it extend to the championship? Will he hold the grudge over the league for the full year? I mean, when do you draw the line and say enough is enough?
Well, is there a point? Sorry, go ahead, Joe.
I think the other wider point, because the specifics of Schmidt and Gavan can drag us in. There is the wider point that Eamon Sweeney raises, and Brendan O'Brien did it very well, very eloquently here last Sunday, about the fact that increasingly IRFU TV, or Irish Rugby TV, and FAI TV now see themselves, and this goes across the board, Premier League clubs, Leinster TV, yes. They all see themselves now as being media companies in their own right, and realise they can probably make money in the long term.
Well, who had the exclusive 2 weeks ago when Martin O'Neill finally commented that he'd agreed his contract?
Exactly, and I was going to, I can show you here, I had written it down. Here's the so I guess a ton of people listening can say to themselves, look, I don't really care. This doesn't bother me, this is not a big issue. But if it becomes propaganda, and I was going to use the example of Martin O'Neill. So we saw Martin O'Neill talk about his contract situation on 2 occasions in the last month. The first was on FAI TV, where he did a 2 or 3 minute, and I don't know why these things always look like there's a hostage situation, but he's if they could just think about production values, it's just a personal thing.
Instead of being chained to a radiator,
the lighting and the weird backdrop is just always very strange. Even put a plant in there behind him, or just something, signs of life. It doesn't have to be a bunker. Anyway, so he's being interviewed. 2-3 minutes. Are you happy to sign your contract? I am, Martin. Yeah, you must be delighted. Yeah, no, I'm delighted. And an exciting League of Nations on the way. Yeah, it's going to be very good. End of interview. And not one mention of the fact that he had been the favourite and in discussions with Stoke City. So if newspapers are and print and radio and everything is sidelined to a point where it gets no access, and that is the only interview Martin O'Neill might do, that is what you're getting. Now, if you're a fan who says, I only care about watching the games and I don't care about the personalities or what they're like, fine, but I think you're in the minority. I think we love sport because of the personalities. And the second interview O'Neill did was with Tony, which, I mean, O'Neill just turned it into a disgrace. I mean, all by himself. The questions Tony asked were perfectly fair. But that issue of propaganda, if FAI TV and IRFU TV and Leinster TV and Munster TV are where we're all headed in 30 years, then it will be pretty dull.
Well, this is where we're getting to, almost particularly when it comes to the national teams, and we can park Dublin for a moment, although there's a certain aspect to it as well. Sometimes we treat these national sports teams as if they are somehow an extension of the nation, that it's a formal part of the state, that Martin O'Neill holds public office, that Joe Schmidt holds public office, and then we tend to demand the same responses of them as we would from a president or a Taoiseach or a minister or anyone else. And of course that's absurd, because who does Martin O'Neill answer to other than the FAI executive? But who else does he answer to? Are perhaps, the people who are paying his wages, which include the people who take out season tickets or who show up on a muggy November night to watch Ireland take on Moldova or Oman in another friendly. That there is a certain responsibility to those people as well. And if we're getting to the point where they only communicate through their own state organs, as you might call them in another era, and there is no sense of being open to scrutiny from the paying public, then will we get to a point where there's such a critical mass of public dismay and sympathy that they actually start voting with their feet and don't going? Now, maybe it's a leap to say that Joe Schmidt or Martin O'Neill's media policy will somehow lead to empty seats and the absence of bums in Lansdowne Road.
See, I don't think it will. I think people will still go.
But might it get to that point?
If
they become so antagonistic, if Martin O'Neill continues the campaign against Tony O'Donoghue, might people go, not paying to see that?
I sort of feel they'll always do the odd sit-down interview here and there, and enough to keep things going. But it will become a lot duller. But I still think the attraction of the games will trump that.
You'd like to hope so, but then do the games become as attractive when the media are handcuffed in how they cover them because of their inability to perform any media?
Not for me. I mean, how the media and how they interact with the characters and how characters respond to scrutiny or interesting questions, all of that stuff is part of the whole enjoyment of sport and the circus of it. I might be in the minority.
But the circus of it is the point, because Enda McIlroy has written before, former colleague of yours, Keiran, has written before.
Current,
apologies, Enda, has written the point that he doesn't think Ireland is actually a nation of sports junkies at all, but rather we're a nation of event junkies. And part of the reason why there is such hysteria around an All-Ireland final between Dublin and Mayo that could easily sell 200,000 tickets, and yet a league clash between the two might not sell 10, is because of the sense of event.
Yeah.
And if the media are constrained in their ability to naturally hype up that sense of event because the stakeholders or the main antagonists won't talk to them, then maybe it will come back to bite them on the financial backside.
I mean, who can say for sure, I suppose. Do you want to have a last word on this and we'll move off it?
Yeah, no, I think we've covered it all.
Okay, Grant. Because there's nothing where, I mean, people I think don't really care in some respects as well.
It's the media talking about the media, really, isn't it?
It's sort of, it is, but then honestly,
it does give an
watch back the FAI TV with Martin O'Neill. You'll get it on YouTube. And this guy's just been talking to Stoke City. He's potentially left the job.
Has Michael O'Neill been questioned in anything like the same way, like when he was discussing talking to Scotland?
I don't know.
Scotland, you know, I do think a lot of it is because I suppose down here we are more focused on the Republic team rather than the Northern team. But I think part of it is people were hoping Michael O'Neill will return. Whereas with Martin, I don't think anybody would have been overly upset if he had moved on. I think that's part of it too.
It felt like the right time. We'll get to Ewan McKenna in conversation with Stephen Kenny in just a moment. But Keith Earls is all across the papers again. I mean, it's funny, as Joe Schmidt rows back on saying what he can to journalists, Keith Earls over the last 10 days has been unbelievably open and giving and vulnerable. It makes me love Keith Earls about 20 times more. The stuff he's talking about is so relatable, and he's just brilliant. He's talking to the Sunday Independent, Brendan Fanning, Peter Reilly in the Sunday Times, Liam Heaney in the Mail, Neil O'Riordan in the Sun. All of the Sunday papers, really, it seems, got time with Keith Earls after the training session.
It was a collective sit-down, because the quotes are similar. They were all done well. They all took a different angle. Brendan Fanning worked in nicely a quote from David Gillick
on Earls' running style.
Yeah, which was interesting. I particularly liked Peter O'Reilly's, and it was about how he has changed from being, I suppose, the rookie to now he's the veteran leader now, helping the likes of Jacob Stockdale, and how he's taken on a mentoring role, and how he's learned through the years by making mistakes, really. And what was fascinating was how he was such a slave to superstition.
Yeah.
Because there's a difference that I think that he would have missed out on the time, and now he realises is, like we were talking, Gavan, about, you know, how Rory McIlroy and Pádraig like to prepare, let's say, the weekend of a big event. And you hear this word a lot from sports people, routine. Routine's different to having superstitions. He became a slave to having, like he talked about how it was ridiculous, how at one stage he couldn't go onto a pitch without rosary beads in a shorts pocket. You know, no pre-match routine was complete without watching Diego Maradona do his keepy-uppy warm-up routine on YouTube. Supposedly a reminder for Earls that he needed to relax and be natural, but in reality just another crutch.
Yeah.
And
because I remember him talking about the superstitions before. It was Kenneth Egan, the boxer, who went and gave a talk to the team at Carton House a couple of years ago that actually jolted Earls out of dropping this habit, because he's been very open before about the superstitions. And there was one game where the rosary beads were left back at the hotel room, and he'd arrived at the stadium, and it absolutely panic, a complete slave to it, and he really decided around then he had to ditch it.
Yeah, because the important thing is do something that makes you relax. It's Maradona today, it's doing something else. Like you had one where, was it Sonia at the 2003 World Championships, was she in Paris? She had run decently, was it, in the first heat, and then she lost her runners on the tube, on the metro.
Right.
And it caused her somewhat of a meltdown, or again an underperformance, because they were her runs. Whereas you'll have other athletes. I remember reading a book by a great.
The runners thing I get. The rosary beads not so much.
I can't get the runners thing because it's really like if your cue or your golf clubs go missing.
Yeah, but the whole point is right to be ready for an event where it's not there.
Fair enough.
Because there was an American. Is it not clay pigeon shooting? But in the Olympic event, what's that?
It's 3 times you've hit that table.
So like the summer version of biathlon, whichever one that is.
No, not the pentathlete, but basically just the shooting. It's not clay pigeon shooting. What's the event in the Olympics that they do that?
They do about 10 events.
Yeah, and not that one where they just do shooting. It's shooting at the Olympics. But I remember there's a guy called.
You've just banged the table again.
You'll be
banging the table is Kieran's version of rosary beads.
That a guy called Lanny Bassam, he was talking about the mental approach, and he was on about how one time where he lost. He saw a competitor who was just clutch, and about how he didn't have the gun that he was supposed to have at it, and his mentality switched to gotta be cool to win with somebody else's gun. Right. He was that adaptable. Yeah. There are sports people at this level, and he seems to have a very good routine now. He keeps relaxed. It varies through the years too. It was a theme in the Harrington piece, and it reminded me actually. I think the Irish rugby guys have been very forthcoming on this. Like the documentary on the Grand Slam in 2009, and Alan English did a great book with like he did with Munster in 2006, where he had each of the players, and they all individually. The technical term in psychological terms is they call it eyes off, the individual zone of optimal functioning. In other words,
say that again for me.
Eyes off. There's an individual zone where you optimally function, basically individual zone of optimal functioning.
So in an individual zone where you perform your best.
Yeah. So Declan Kidney was excellent in that. He talked about how each guy has a different way. Each guy has his own way, but as a manager, you try and get it to the mid range, right? Which they would talk in psychology about the inverted U. In other words, you have to be up somewhat, but if you're up too much, you drain. So that's where you want to be with the middle group. But individually, guys are different. So like in that, you would have had Ronan O'Gara would have spoken about how he's noticed how Brian O'Driscoll would be always can't wait for it. Whereas Paul O'Connell in the same piece talked about, I wish it was over.
Yeah, nerves.
I wish it was done with. I just wanted to get through. And Ronan O'Gara basically said that he was more like starting out, more like O'Connell, and he got closer to O'Driscoll without ever being O'Driscoll. And guys get there in different ways. In that book they talked about how he was a bit like Keith. I think Andrew Trimble liked to read the Bible. That was his way of taking his mind off and getting him centred or whatever, and God was with him or whatever. Whereas you had other guys then who were much more hyper, and that suited them. Because one of the great classic books is Christy O'Connor's Last Man Standing.
Yeah.
And that book is about a golden era of goalkeepers. They all played the same position, they all played the same sport, obviously, but had different ways to get there.
Yeah.
Like you had someone like Davy Fitz. Like they like sometimes to give you a number. So like if you gave like someone like Davy Fitz like to be wired around a 9 out of 10. Brendan Cummins Donal Óg was about a 7.5, 8 out of 10. Cummins somewhat the same sphere. You had a brilliant goalkeeper who was Rastafarian, horizontal in Damien Fitzhenry, but that worked for Damien Fitzhenry. Sure. So each guy has different ways. But the thing is that Earls has found a good place for him, and that you can have a routine, you like to do different things, but not to be a slave to superstition. Because as you said, what if you don't have, if you can't get the Maradona coverage wherever you are, or if the rosary beads go missing. So it's important to make that distinction between routine versus rituals and superstitions.
That adaptability is a key point.
On a similar note, Esther Ledecky is a name that no one would have heard of 24 hours ago. She is a Czech athlete who won overnight the Super G in downhill skiing at the Olympics on borrowed skis. She was already notable for being the only athlete at the Games that was competing on both snowboard and skis. Wow. She was so unexpectedly in the hunt that she didn't. In fact, NBC had already cut the coverage. She wasn't in the top 20. She was no way she was going to break into it. She was 21st in the penultimate run. She borrowed skis off somebody else, came first and won an Olympic, much to her own amazement. borrowing someone else's skis.
Wow.
If that isn't a sign that in fact ultimately it's all about the raw talent in the body and not attached to it, I don't know what is.
I say this as an atheist or agnostic atheist anyway. I think the belief in God through all areas of life, but certainly in sport, must be a lovely crutch. And I don't say that in a pejorative way, but a lovely crutch to
comfort blanket.
To have. Like, this is out of my control. What's for me won't pass me. God's looking after me. Is it Jonathan Edwards?
Jonathan Edwards spoke about that. Now he's gone the other way.
He's lost his faith.
Yeah, but he has. But it served him great as an athlete.
And Katie Taylor, I presume, has it. There must be a lovely thing to pray and almost feel, well, I'm in God's hands and this is out of my control. I'm just going to perform as best I can within my parameters. But actually, it's a bigger thing than me. Whereas lonely old atheist over here would be thinking, it's everyone for themselves, no one's looking out for me.
Yeah, where's the chaos theory in that? But sometimes I wonder, like, yes, it might be a great comfort, but then does it also frustrate them if things don't go their way, and then they also have to attribute their defeat to part of the God's plan or the cosmic ordering of the universe? That might they get frustrated that clearly God doesn't want them to win?
Well, somebody said if everyone's praying to God, then every game's a draw, So like I read that there recently, but there is something, like, the whole point is that sense of acceptance for whatever comes. I remember reading Arthur Ashe speak about it in a non-religious context, whereas I've spoken to Katie Taylor about that, and Dean Smith was he would have coached Michael Jordan, North Carolina. He would have spoken, he was a very religious man, and about how he found himself early in his career tormenting himself, what's going to happen here, and he was draining so much energy and losing focus, and he just came to realising off acceptance, and it was through a religious context that, my maker is still going to be my maker. So whether you're religious or not, but I think people who do have it possibly are easier for them to have that attitude of
going
acceptance into it.
I think so. So, like, Earls is saying lots of interesting things. He gave similar quotes to the print dailies in the build-up to the Italian match, but there's some extra stuff here. Brendan Fanning, you mentioned, got on to David Gillick to see what he made of Earls' chase back at the end of the Italian game, and David Gillick said, I watched it on TV, it was from a standing start, I thought, holy shit, he's going to catch him. He looked lean, and when he was running, this was an interesting point, he looked lean, and when he was running, Earls didn't have his shoulders up around his ears, tensed up like you see sometimes. He looked like a runner. Kind of an interesting point, because often Derval O'Rourke did a roadshow with us a couple of years ago, and she said she watches rugby and football, and she's like, most of them can't run properly. They're tense, their shoulders up around their ears. He says Earls looked like a runner, really relaxed.
At 9.7 metres a second.
Peter O'Reilly had that. He had all the stats. Yeah,
and this is the 80th minute. This is after 80 minutes of, okay, let's not denigrate the Italians too much. Not the most challenging international test match Keith Earls has ever played, but nonetheless, it's 80 minutes of professional international rugby and elite sport. And after 80 minutes of that, he was able to run the equivalent of, at that speed, he would have run 100 metres in about 10.3 or 10.4 seconds from a standing start.
Yeah, and there was something about his jump as well, 64 centimetres?
64 centimetres dead jump, which is over 2 feet. Yeah. With no running start or anything. Yeah.
He's loads of good quotes. Like, he talks about the, and I still remember it so well, the 09 Lions tour where he was thrown in very young. He would have been 20 or 21 and started the first test, and people might forget now, but he dropped the first few balls that came to him.
Yes.
And he never really made his way back onto that team in that tour of South Africa in 09, and he says that really damaged him for a long time, which doesn't surprise me. You could see, vividly remember that game, you could see the confidence drain out of him. It was physically visible. You could just see it through the TV. He was shook, and it was interesting that he says it took him a long time to get over that 09 Lions tour. And the other thing, he's genuinely worried about the future. Don't know what I'm going to do. Unfortunately, I have no education. If I could have my time back, I'd have concentrated in school, possibly gone to college. That's something I'm going to have to look at for the next 2-3 years. Coaching, I'm not sure about that either. But that's Keith Earls. He's in the form of his life, which is great.
And he's only, this escaped me, maybe this speaks more about me than anything else, but that he's only 3 tries off, 4 tries off, being Ireland's second highest try scorer of all time, which is extraordinary, because I don't think no one would ever put him in the same league as a Tommy Bowe or a Gordon Darcy, but clearly, like, he already in his contribution to the green shirt has gotten over the whitewash that many
Dennis
more times.
Hickey in there?
Dennis Hickey is 29, Tommy Bowe is 30, and Brian O'Driscoll 46.
He's on 27 himself.
Right.
So
and he's got more years in the tank, clearly. That's within range.
O'Driscoll at 46 won't be caught, I can say. Before we go Ewan McKenna, and somebody points out, by the way, Joe, you giving out about Keiran banging the table is more annoying than Keiran banging the table. Thank you, John. So Stephen Kenny with Ewan McKenna in the Business Post. It seems Ewan was dreading this interview, or not looking forward to it especially.
Partly because of the same reason that people seem to dread having to talk to Jim Gavan after a match, because he just thought that he would get absolutely nothing out of it. But he had heard that Stephen Kenny was a little bit different, and so he said, okay, fair enough, I'll take the interview. And Stephen says, and there's no better way to do this other than to quote directly from Ewan's piece. So Kenny starts to talk. As someone who lived in Brazil, he begins, you'll appreciate the value of social equality. I remember some years ago the statistic was that 94% of the land there was owned by 6% of the people. And then we have an interlude from Ewan just going, really? Kenny continues, here in Ireland it seems to be déjà vu. It's interesting to me. I don't know if we've learned lessons. The cost of living in cities is prohibitive and escalating at a scary rate. But this was the situation before the banking crisis, so it's all based on property. But it hurts the quality of people's lives. It's a better quality in rural areas, but then there's no jobs in a Dublin-centric economy. A vicious circle. And it could go on, but the one thing that struck me is, aside from it being a great portrait of a guy who has done phenomenal things with very limited resources, particularly the week that's in it with the League of Ireland kicking going again for a season. And it seems to a certain amount that we have a certain amount of media self-flagellation for the first weekend of the season, that, you know, is the media doing enough to try and, you know, get more public buy-in? Is it chicken and egg? You know, will the public be interested? Are the media wasting its time? Perhaps there isn't enough coverage when we're talking about the League of Ireland of the personalities like that we do have a very noble Corinthian approach where we try to keep it all to matters on the pitch, and to a certain degree the animus that's crept in.
There's great characters and backstories
in the league.
But are they heard?
In the league. The thing that it's touching on here, they want to tell them, you know, and it's something that we could go to more.
They're accessible,
And it's like that with a lot of them. And you take the boxers, great. A lot of athletes, great. And that's one thing that, again, without bringing everything back to our national games or whatever, they should be. The fact that they are in demand to be interviewed is actually a privilege. It's something that other sports would love, including the League of Ireland. But where they are excellent personality beyond, and they understand that they're in the business of promoting their game, but they do have a backstory because of what they've been through. Like they obviously, you know, quite a lot of them have spent time, let's say, in the UK, and that again is another, as Gavan said, the start. It was the right choice of intro by Ewan. You know, you're not going to get that all the time, and there is that tradition in the League of Ireland where we had it with. Remember Aidan Fitzmaurice? I remember doing a great piece on Damien Richardson, just a study of his program notes through the years, which was referencing everything from capitalism, socialism, like Stephen Kenny's carrying on that LOI tradition, but also then where he gets to the setbacks that he himself had, like all managers. I mean, yesterday I was interviewing a guy called Richard Shuttleworth, who would be a skill acquisition coach, high performance coach with Eddie Jones, and he was talking about how Jones has reinvented himself in the light of failure, and Kenny points out that beyond Guardiola and people like
look, since John tweeted in, I'm not going to mention it.
For people on the radio, he's just realised he's banging the table.
that Pep, you swear I'm real passionate about all this here. Are you listening? But it's that Pep Guardiola aside, and some people would have mixed views on his Bayern Munich experience. All coaches have experienced failure of sorts.
Ewan points out of Kenny, and I didn't realise it was this stark at one point, July 2004, when he was aged just 32. I'm suddenly thinking, oh God, I'm 32 now, and this is a scary thing. 2004, age 32, he has 2 kids, a pregnant wife, a mortgage, and Bohemians sack him. And that's a terrible prospect. And then September 2012, you think it's so recent, considering the success he's had subsequently. September 2012, his daughter found out in school before he did that Shamrock Rovers had shunted him aside, leaving his late father, a Talaman, devastated. And Kenny, as you said, Keiran, is not pretending that these blows are not so bad. He's saying they are devastating. They are horrific. The highs have been high, but the lows are really devastating. and that takes its toll, and talks about the fact that it's so public as well. Like, all of us have setbacks in life. When it's public, it's, for whatever reason, it's 10 times worse.
I didn't know that, but again, just in more little nuggets of brilliance in Ewan's piece, I didn't know that Stephen Kenny, when you would have had to do a thesis when you're getting your UEFA Pro licence, and his thesis was how to build a club effectively out of nothing.
Right.
And that was motivated in turn because he had developed an interest in Bate Borisov, because Dundalk had beaten them in a Europa League or a UEFA Cup thing way back when, a Champions League qualifier in 2003, and yet then Bate, which is effectively a club in a very similar boat to Dundalk, basically no domestic attendance, no foreign players, very little budget to do anything, somehow making the group stage of the Champions League 6 times.
Yeah.
What's going on there? Stephen gets fascinated, he does a thesis on it, then eventually he's offered the Dundalk job, which is apparently brokered over cups of chicken soup, which is beautiful imagery up in his gaff in Donegal, and he puts the thesis into practice, and look what he's done.
Yeah,
it's an amazing piece.
He's been on here. He was on yesterday, actually, I should mention. He was on the Saturday panel ahead of the season really kicking into gear, and he was with Ian Morris from Bohemians and Alan Murphy of Galway, so you can download that. He was on with Nathan, and he's been on the show a few times before and talked about his philosophy on the game, and he loved the Dutch teams in particular in their heyday. That's kind of his inspiration. And he was asked about the state of the game here and didn't want to get too much into it because he doesn't want to criticise people. But as you'd know if you've seen Dundalk play at all, he espouses the following. When players are encouraged to express themselves and to actually fulfil their potential, they can often surprise you and show the full extent of their talents. It's how I try to operate. And that is how he has forced his Dundalk players to operate, yeah. So that's worth a read. We don't have time really to get into it, but we picked out a few pieces on the Barry Bonnell situation. Sam Wallace is both in the Sunday Telegraph and the Sunday Independent. Ollie Holt has I think a very good piece in the Mail on page 88. It's in the Mail, the Irish Mail on Sunday as well. Just in short, and it really is worth checking out, but in short, Manchester City have spent already about £1 million investigating what's happened at their club over the last 20-30 years. Guardiola spoke about it very well on Friday, and he's talking about the situation at Crewe where Dario Grady and John, I've left the piece outside, the director.
Yes, is it Bowman or Bennett?
Or Bowler. We better double check.
I'll double check that while you're looking anyway.
Anyway, the Dario Grady and the current chairman were both at Crewe when Barry Bonnell was appointed. Grady wrote a character reference for him in 1994 when he was accused of on a charge of sorry Richie, what are you saying to me?
John Bowler,
sorry, okay. So but Dario Grady wrote a character reference for a Florida court for Grady as well, or sorry, for Bonnell in the past, and Holt is very clear. He's not saying they knew what was going on, but certainly their ignorance enabled Bonnell to ruin a lot of lives at Crewe. And the scary thing is that both are still very much a part of the Crewe setup. They're on the board, chairman, director. And on Friday, when Guardiola was talking about Manchester City's responsibility, and I'm not saying City have been perfect here either, by the way, but City's responsibility to act.
It's been very upfront.
The word from Crewe when they were doorstep by Channel 4 was no comment. And it just seems shocking that both of them are still there. Holt's argument is if they had any proper sense of things, they would both resign. It's inappropriate for them to continue.
And the awful thing about the whole story, and no one wants to try and skirt over it or to play down what we've already found out, but it would seem, based on again another piece that's in the Mail today, that Barry Bonnell and some other fellow abusers apparently used to occasionally organise matches against sides managed by other abusers, which would have a situation where you'd have
proper paedophile ring going on there,
which is absolutely appalling.
Yeah,
and it's awful to think that we might after everything that's come out about Bonnell in the last couple of years, that we might only have even barely scratched the surface of the extent of that problem.
Yeah, that is the point actually. Daniel Taylor made that point during the week, who's done a lot of good work on this obviously, and Sam Wallace today in the Sunday Telegraph and Sunday Independent, the thrust of his point, he has various stats on it, is that this thing, we haven't even scratched the surface, and he lists off so many others who've been involved at various other clubs. A lot of them are dead now, so there's not going to be really any great justice for the victims, although he was saying there could be civil cases taken against the clubs, and they would use the same legal route and argument as what victims of Jimmy Savile did, whereby they get together. They don't get together. In fact, they make their complaints, and actually there's such an obvious correlation and similarity between the evidence of how the abuse happened and what happened.
Yeah.
When it's put together, it's obvious that they're telling the truth, and so that's what was done in the Jimmy Savile case.
Yeah,
so there could be huge civil actions.
If the abusers inflicted the abuse during the course of their employment, and if it was closely connected to the same, which one would think is a pretty open and shut case in terms of a football coach being an abuser.
Yeah, so there may be some kind of legal recourse for the victims by way of civil action against the clubs, but a lot of the scouts seem to have passed away, and that Sam Wallace piece just lists off the number of different coaches at different clubs. There's a big inquest happening at the moment. The FA have kicked it off, and it's due to be, Sheldon is the name of the lawyer, it's due to conclude around Easter time of this year, and I think it's from 1970 to 2005 is the parameters, and the word is it's going to be absolutely devastating, shocking. This thing is, I mean, Barry Bonnell is the tip of the iceberg. This thing was absolutely rife, understandably,
I mean, just
when you
keep
think of the
thinking
access
of-
they would have had.
I mean, there's so many victims on it, but like, I think Gary Speed has.
His family have come out and clarified that his family have come out and said there's been a lot of speculation about that, and they want it on the record that Speed never, as kind of said, there was no issue with him and
Okay.
Bonnell, even
Right.
though he was coached by him,
Right.
because people have obviously made that connection as well. But I think it's going to be shocking. I think it's going to be, this thing is going to take a couple of years to parse through.
And just to go back to the main point, Manchester City being very upfront and already having committed £1 million to it, and in the course of that, even voluntarily identifying another person who was in their employ at some time, who they believe now was an abuser, very upfront about trying to get to the root of it, and at least to turn the history books upside down, shake whatever they can find, and be all out there, which is Crew have absolutely not done.
No, Crew are a disgrace. I mean, that much is clear. But like the notion that because it's 2018, clubs will act properly. 3 years ago, Chelsea got a victim to sign a confidentiality clause, not to go public with what had happened at Chelsea.
Yeah.
So, I mean, even as recently as 3 years ago, when we should all know a lot better about trying to put a veil of silence over the thing, Chelsea tried to do that.
Yeah. Ollie Hull's piece has a similar point as well. The Crew 17 months ago promised an independent inquiry, which doesn't appear to have started.
That's
yet,
right. Yeah,
much alone finished.
Yeah, no, it's dreadful stuff. I think this thing is going to explode in a way. Even the worst case scenario, when it first emerged, I don't think people really fully understood how big a story it was going to be. So that's in a few of the papers. We're pretty much out of time. Kieran Shannon from the Irish Examiner, thank you. And Gavan Reilly from TV3, thank you.
Joe.
We will take a short break. You can podcast the paper review as ever in the usual places.
Off the ball.
On News Talk. In association with AIR. Don't miss live Allianz League's GAA action this month on the AIR Sport Pack, the home of Irish sport.
Tech Talk. With Jess Kelly.
Coming up this evening at 6, we'll hear from the company whose technology is being used by the Irish rugby team during the Six Nations about how analytics can help prevent injuries and even identify future sports stars. There's a new taxi app in town. It's called Whistle, but how does it work? And of course, we'll answer your